affect our economy, what we eat, what we pay for what we eat, etc. But you see that across the globe as well. Places where you're not going to get a lot of places experiencing greater yields, some of them perhaps, to the north of our latitudes here, but most of the planet experiencing some kind of agricultural loss and the loss of good food calories for us. All right, so let's get back to the Midwest here though. What specifically might our futures look like with respect to climate? A lot of what has been predicted for the Great Lakes upper Midwest region here, we're already starting to see. Will sound kind of familiar to you, maybe with the exception of this summer here. Predictions for warmer and drier summers. That's going to become the norm. So to prepare for that on our farm, we installed a 300-gallon rain barrel in our barn, trying to capture as much water as possible because we didn't want to run out this year like we ran out last year and our garden suffered. This year we didn't have to worry about it. But in the future, perhaps we need to be storing more water for the times of the year when we don't have water. The amount of precipitation falling all at one time is probably going to change here in the Midwest as well. Probably wetter springs. Haven't we had like 2 or at least 3 really wet springs now, I think in the last few years? That affects everything from the economy to agriculture to what's going on in your backyards as well. So likely warmer, wetter springs, spring coming earlier, and when it comes, being really wet. So there are lots of economic consequences of that as well, but here I'm showing you an agricultural field. How late can we actually get the crops in and still have a viable product, knowing that we're going to have hotter and drier summers in the future. And then this past year was a great example of more precipitation falling all at once. I actually don't remember where I grabbed this one from. I think it was from Minnesota. You know, big snow piles that were there. I'm sure some of that was blown in or transported in, but we had a lot of snow. It's not fair to say last winter was the result of climate change, but it's changing that variability and changing how much moisture is falling all at one time. This goes for snow as well as it does for water. Recognize this place? Harold's Landing in Moline? Yeah. So more flooding. How is that going to affect where our communities are? How much is that going to affect what rate we pay for flood insurance? Should you be even living there in the first place? Should you not? Should you build levees? Should you not? These are all things we've heard about in our local community, haven't we? And then the final question I hear students talking about all the time is, all right, so if I just take shorter showers and I change my light bulbs to compact fluorescent light bulbs, we can stop climate change, right? Those will help, but climate change is a global phenomenon. So I tell them that it's not a bad idea to make small changes, and small changes, if everybody in this room made small changes, of course they are going to magnify, and that's a good thing. But the short answer is we can't actually stop climate change. Things are so bad, and this is the depressing part of the talk. If you weren't depressed already, here's the depressing part. Things are so bad that even if we stopped all of our carbon emissions today globally, like every factory shut down, every car shut down, all that shut down, we would still continue warming through the end of the century because of what we had already put into the atmosphere. So we can't stop it, but what we can do is prevent it from getting to those worst case scenarios, the ones where they get kind of, in the media they try to have these scare tactics, the future's going to look like this and how scary that is. We can prevent from getting to those worst case scenarios by doing many things locally, by doing many things at the federal government as well and globally. So we can slow down those changes. But again, my students ask, well, why me? Why can't we just ask the federal government to do that? I don't want to change my ways. I want to drive from upper campus to lower campus in my car. Which you don't need to do. Why can't we just make somebody else do it? Or why don't we just pass a law that we can do that? I mean, I think those are all important things. The federal government probably does play a role, but individuals play a role as well. People who can afford it, maybe putting in solar panels, maybe having electric vehicles instead of gigantic Escalade vehicles that one person drives, and you might not need that. So a lot of them are individual personal decisions that you have to make. Again, small changes will really help. I know my parents and grandparents don't like to turn down the thermostat in the winter time, so I mean, I understand that, but it saves you money, it saves greenhouse gas emissions as well. Everybody doing their part will make a difference here, but we can't stop the climate change actually from happening. And the other thing that I leave my students with, and I might leave you with, is trying to convince them to make changes now to benefit future generations. It's a really hard concept to think about. Maybe now in your generation, you're thinking about your legacy, leaving behind, what you want to leave for your children. My students at 18 to 21 aren't thinking about that. But I don't even know my future children why should I do my changes now, my selfish me, for what's going to happen in the future? But I do try to get that across to them, that what we do today, the changes that we make today, make the planet better for the future generations. So, I don't know if that's leaving you ending on a light note or not here. But I recognize that I touched on a lot of things that you might have questions about, so I wanted to make sure I leave plenty of time for any questions that you have.
Glacier Bay is sort of a thermometer for the glacier receding over the years.
Mm-hmm.
When Captain Cook sailed by there in 1800, it was right at the mouth of the icy straits, and it's been continually receding. So if this is man-made, why was it receding back in 1800s? And if it is man-made, what is the differentiate, or the difference in population and man-made pollutants that were there that could be reduced at this time? If you think it's man-made,
Sure.
it was happening back in 1800 when the population was just a fraction of what we have, the world population.
Right. So to quickly summarize the question, it was, what about in one place, this is Alaska, right, in Glacier Bay, where we have been seeing receding glaciers for a period of time, not just in modern 21st century here, but it's been happening since the 19th century as well. My response to that would be, I don't know the actual population difference from then till now, but that's not as important as saying, we can't just talk about one place and one place changing. We have to talk about, do we see those same changes happening in more places than just one? Is it a global pattern that we're seeing? And now people will actually pick out things like, there are a couple of glaciers in Antarctica that are growing. And people will pick out that one or two that are growing and say, see, climate change isn't happening. They're kind of grabbing at straws. There are things that happen on a local scale that dictate those changes. So it can be ocean dynamics, it could be temperature of the water that are changing the leading edge of that glacier and causing it to recede. But now we see, I don't have a percentage for you exactly, but something like the majority of all the world's glaciers are experiencing some kind of change. And when we see that change over a period of time, over a larger scale, it gives us more confidence that it is happening. So it's hard to say that something large-scale atmospherics affecting one place in a different way than it affects the others is evidence it's not changing. But if we think of the larger scale pattern, it does give us that evidence that it's a consequence of climate change, not a cause of climate change.
When we had the eruption of Krakatoa, puts up lots of dust,
Yes.
sulfur dioxide,
Yes.
carbon dioxide, and we had a worldwide canoe temperature reduction.
Right.
So those pollutants in the atmosphere had a tendency to reflect the radiation, and now you come up with a theory that it's carbon dioxide that lets more through, but won't let that much longer radiation rays dissipate into the space.
Okay, I'll comment on both of those things. So yes, when glaciers erupt, they emit sulfur dioxide particles into the atmosphere, and those generally have a cooling effect. Same thing happens now with our factory pollution that we have. It's called, actually, they gave it a name of global dimming. So it reduces the amount of light that gets to the surface of the Earth, and it reflects more of it back to space. And this is happening in the stratosphere. So nobody debates that. Everybody agrees that that's happening. The global cooling happens, for a year or two after that, and then things really disperse or fall out of the atmosphere. Maybe just, if I can quickly go back to this, the greenhouse effect that you mentioned about letting more light in, that's not the case exactly. People oftentimes confuse the ozone hole with letting more light into the planet. The same amount is coming from the sun. We might have a little bit more reflected from clouds or polluted clouds, but the main thing is that this layer traps the radiation that is coming from our planet. That's not necessarily changing. That rate of radiation isn't changing, but the ability for it to escape is changing, and as a result of a different particle that behaves differently in the atmosphere. So they are both correct, but one of them actually makes us warmer and one of them makes us cooler, and they're actually fighting each other right now. We're still moving to a warmer state, but we do have other sulfur dioxide particles that are cooling our planet as well.
How do you factor increasing global population of humans? This has to have a big effect.
It
And
does.
it's continuing, that is the increase.
We have a lot of people on our planet, and it's only increasing. It's definitely true. I guess I can go back to this graphic here that's been showing that every time population does increase, those population increases generally occur with a change in wealth as well. You have more wealth, you want more stuff, you want electricity. To get electricity, you need to have coal-fired power plants or something like that. So they're coupled with one another here. The part that is challenging with respect to global population is how can we use that information to predict what the future is going to be like. So we basically have different research groups all around the world putting these computer models together and trying to predict what things are going to be like in 100 years. Rather than waiting for 100 years to see what the planet's going to be like, we try to have the computer simulate for us the atmospheric dynamics. The uncertainty about population, how many people are going to be on our planet in the future, is one of the biggest variables in those climate models. Is there a certain level that's truly sustainable? I think we've actually passed that carrying capacity of our planet. I'm not advocating for fewer people on the planet exactly, but we have to use our resources widely if our population is going to be increasing, that's for sure. I don't know if I answered your question or not.
Yes.
I have a quick question. Is your data available to local city rules and laws that can access them? Do they reach out to you? Do you reach out to them? Because whatever we do at a residential level or an individual level is subject to the rules of the city.
Right. I don't have any personal local climate information. Most of that you can rely on the National Weather Service, which is part of NOAA. And that's available to you 24/7, 365 on a daily basis, as well as historic information about how temperature changes have been taking place. And I think both citizens and citizen leaders should take a look at some of that information that is.
I didn't mean that. I mean, if, say, for example, if somebody's making a change in how they are taking care of their garden, or going into native prairie garden and stopping all of those chemicals and all these other things, that's subject to city law.
Okay, sure.
And the city sometimes does not, if the neighbors complain, then the city will not allow you not to have a chemical plastic lawn. You're supposed to have a chemical plastic lawn, is what I'm trying to say. So
Right.
is the city, can you have some influence on city laws that permit you to, for instance, have non-chemical laws?
Sure.
Or
I'm sorry.
make it, in Denmark, they made a rule, you use chemical on your lawn, you go in prison, or you pay a fine,
Right,
all that sort of
right.
thing. So if you have to have a lawn, it has to be manually done,
Right.
and not, so that's my question, what access do you have to city laws?
Apologize for misinterpreting your question the first time around, but it's a great one, and it's something that you're all faced with, right? Aren't there laws about how long the grass can be before you have to mow it, you can get in trouble?
Yes.
In places now like California, there are very strict regulations about how much you can water your lawn or not water your lawn in a drought period. And we experience some of those as well. I don't personally necessarily have influence on that, but I think all this information is widely available, especially the IPCC, these reports. I'm not finding my graphic, but that UN organization puts out these publications. That is probably the top level of easy to understand information that has been scientifically verified. That's a good one to go to argue with your city leaders that this thing that we're doing right now doesn't make sense in terms of what's going to happen in the future. We need to have grasses that are more water resistant or water resilient with respect to that. I think you can use that scientific information to support a cause like that.
But individuals will not be as effective as somebody like you that has a body of knowledge behind you and has a certain credibility that an individual would probably not have. It's a big fight.
Sure, I'm definitely sure it is. I do think there are different levels of action that can take place, whether it's individual or at the community level or at the government level. All of them have their levels of effectiveness, but I agree that if someone getting behind it with a lot of data information could be influential, that's for sure.
Yeah, so we'll do a call on you.
Yeah, I guess is the theory that we can not really avoid our eventual destruction, but maybe just slow it down?
Exactly.
Yes, and it's kind of depressing. I think it makes, again, I'm using my students as an analogy because that's the ones who I deal with on a daily basis. I can see it in their eyes. And I think they just kind of throw their hands up in the air and they say, well, the hell with it. I'll just get my Escalade and I'll drive around the block just because I can. It doesn't really matter because it's not going to affect me. It's going to affect my kids. Well, that right there is kind of silly. You know they don't have kids when they say things like that, right? So that's the reality part of the situation. That we can't stop it, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't try to prevent us from getting to the worst case scenarios. It buys us time to adapt to those changes as well. Right now, I guess right now we're starting to feel more of the personal connection with climate change when we experience it for ourselves. That's when people start to react to it, right? Or if gas is $15 a gallon, you start to wake up and pay attention to it. So now as weather events start changing quickly and personally affect us, we become a little bit more aware and willing to act on these things. So I'm not saying that you shouldn't do these things, but don't do them with the idea that you're going to stop climate change. You're going to prevent it from getting to the worst case scenario for your future generations.
On the heels of
Smile. You're never going to invite me back again, are you?
on the heels of what you just said and what the question you said, I have a question, another one. The Earth is known, we all know that the Earth has this anti-fragile quality of being able to adjust and adapt. So your studies that you do they factor in, okay, this is a rate of change, do they factor in how the Earth is adjusting to?
Right, so the planet is fairly resilient and able to respond to some changes, and we've seen that in the past before, especially with that example of the dinosaurs and the change of temperature that took place when they were around. The planet had a chance to change. The flowering plants that were there had a chance to adapt, and that the rate of change is happening so fast now that nature can't really respond as quickly as the changes are taking place.
You said that, but
So-
later on, I mean, have your data adjusted that for in the future? Is that if you keep it down to this level, then the Earth can sort of adjust to it? Is there a balance there?
In some respects, yes, but I don't want you to come away from that statement by saying, well, nature will just take care of itself down the road, it'll fix it when we're long gone anyway. Yes, sure, in 3 million years, maybe the planet will figure that out, and it'll adjust to all the wrongdoings that we've done to it. That is probably likely, but over a time span in which we cannot adapt as humans. And there are so many complexities when we talk about climate change. So it's the oceans, it's the atmosphere, it's the planets, it's the animals, it's the biota that are there. So it's hard to pull the whole picture together and say the oceans will respond if the X, Y, and Z happens at this rate. You can't know that with certainty, but our understanding of the interactions between the atmosphere and planets and oceans and all that have been factored into these models, and their level of resilience has been factored in, yes.
I think it hurts the cause sometimes when, like, isn't New York supposed to be underwater right now? According to some predictions.
You know, I don't know. I try not to follow the extremist.
But I mean, doesn't that
views
hurt? It hurts, the overall
Sure.
I think
making
that
believers out of anybody else.
I think that somehow they get so much playtime, so much airtime that the media will focus on some of those extreme predictions, and people think of that as a scare tactic. So I'm not going to listen because it's scary. They made me scared. It makes me doubt the science that's there. But from the scientific perspective, that's how I try to approach the situation. That there's a range of variability, there's a range of certainties that we have here, but I might be even underplaying, honestly, some of the consequences that are happening here. I'm not to say that in an alarmist way, but just kind of the reality that things are going to change.
Does NOAA have a media channel that they can send out this information more accurately?
Yes, I think scientists are working really hard on being better communicators
Good.
because oftentimes we tend to use jargon or lexicon that's unfamiliar to others. Even the word theory, when you hear that in the public media, they make it sound like, well, they're just guessing that this might happen. But that means quite a bit, that word means something quite different to a scientist, that it's the best way that we can tackle a problem with the best information in a repeatable manner. So we use that word with confidence. The media uses it with a hunch or a guess, or they might be wrong, they might be right, things like that. So come away from this conversation that scientists are doing the best that they can. They are not trying to make money off of the situation. We don't make very much money. We are not trying to delude you or dissuade you from anything. We're just trying to present the scientific information as best as possible. We may or may not have done that in the best way in the past, but informing policymakers is a huge part of, should be a part of our jobs. We are not trained to do that, unfortunately.
Is there any way scientifically they're looking at cleansing the atmosphere?
There are some techniques referred to broadly as geoengineering. So oftentimes simulating what a volcano would do and putting things in the atmosphere that would cause our planet to cool. We've thought about that. It's the worst case scenario. Let's not try to mess with the atmosphere too much more policy. There are some people who are trying to pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and convert it into a more stable form of carbon, like a carbonate. So those ideas have been thought of. Most of them at this point are cost prohibitive. The best way to do it in the most cost-effective way would be local scale changes or governmental changes rather than a reactionary engineering change to a problem. But yes, we've been thinking outside the box on some of these.
I was gonna say, as I get older, I'm supposed to get wiser, but actually I just run out of dumb things to do.
I like that. Yeah, and I understand, I mean, that this audience is different than my 20-year-old audience, right? But I think the message is the same, that we have messed with our planet so much that we've changed it to a point that we can't recover from it. But the best we can do is buy ourselves time to adapt to those changes. And we'll be resilient, we'll have people on our planet. I'm not saying we're gonna have a massive die-off or anything like that. We are smart, we are humans, right? We can adapt to some of these things, but we need to make sure that nature doesn't outpace us too much with that rate of change. And we caused it, we suffer the consequences from it, but we also possess the ability to work on changing it for the better as well.
Won't the lack of fossil fuels, I mean, we're using it at a tremendous rate, especially as the world develops, more and more.
Right.
Eventually we're gonna run out of it.
Correct.
So at that point, hopefully well before that time, we've come up with a different solution. Won't that in itself help to slow things down? That's where you stop, at least slow things down, the fossil fuel.
Right, so when we run out of fossil fuels and we have to adapt to some other method of energy production for our lifestyles, yes, we will probably have fewer emissions of greenhouse gases, but there is that lag time of what we put in the atmosphere and then when we see the effects. So the analogy to that would be, if we stopped everything now, all production, we would still warm until the end of the 21st century at least. So it would help, but it wouldn't cause an immediate effect. There'd be still that 30 to 50 year lag time.
Have you taken account of nuclear power, which really doesn't pollute the atmosphere, the globe nearly as much as petroleum and coal, and some new developments, I think in France and other countries, are solving some of the waste disposal problems. And have you factored, are people really taking that as a serious alternative to fossil fuels?
Sure. So the question was, what about nuclear power? Since that produces fewer greenhouse gas emissions, we had a huge rise in the use of nuclear energy around the world. I think, especially in the last presidential election, I think I heard Obama say things like, clean coal technology and nuclear. Everybody was kind of talking about it again. Within the United States, I don't see it advancing too much because we don't have a safe, permanent solution for the storage of the waste products afterwards. Until we solve that, we probably won't move forward with that technology. But the benefit of it is that it is, with respect to the greenhouse gas problem, a lesser two evils, maybe. Question mark. Footnote. Well, thank you very much for your attention, and I hope I haven't depressed you too much. Thank you.